Good morning, and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim as we continue A Prophet in Babylon with Chapter 19, Part B, Butler's Inquisition. Butler opened his portfolio and laid a mass of carefully docketed papers upon the table. "I have here," he said, "details about a dozen men, of whom Stonecroft is one. They are all leading members of New York churches, and by the by, Gaunt, one of them is your friend Roberts. He's not a very bad case, not nearly so bad as the rest, but he's bad enough to be noticeable. He's also been deriving part of his income from some of the worst property in New York. Well, what I propose to do is this. First of all, I shall send to each of the men a detailed statement of all that we know about them. The statement will be too accurate to admit any dispute. I have taken care of that. I shall demand that they at once do the right thing. This gives them a chance. If they don't take it, I shall then begin the publication of a blacklist in the Daily Light. I shall publish their names, the sources of their income, the sworn witnesses of those who have suffered by them, and I shall continue to attack them till public opinion forces them to reform. Of course, this is an extreme measure, but I think it will be effectual." "What about libel?" suggested Gaunt. "Oh, they won't dare to prosecute. They'll be too much afraid of the exposure. You only have to remember half a dozen recent exposures of the same kind in commercial life. In each case, the accused parties remained absolutely silent. Men of this kind will suffer almost any kind of defamation rather than face cross-examination in the witness stand." Butler rose from his seat and began to pace up and down the room. "Excuse me," he said. "I believe I got nervous these weeks. I can't sit still for long together. You see, I've had to work far into the night to put this business through in addition to my other work, and night in New York has been very like hell for the last month." "I've been having such a good time," said Gaunt contritely. "My dear fellow, you have worked in your way, I in mine. You could have done my work, and I could have done yours. Let us each be content with Browning's famous line, 'All service ranks the same with God.'" There was a moment's silence. Then Butler broke out passionately, "It's been a horrible piece of work. Good God, it makes me sick to think of it. Gaunt, how is it that a church, which is founded on the example of the most just and pitiful life that was ever lived, can become the refuge, nay more, the particular property of men like Stonecroft? For that is what it really means. These rich men have bought the church. They have bought the ministry. The process has been so silent and so subtle that neither the church nor the ministry is aware of its own corruption." "It can only be that the ministry has failed in honesty," said Gaunt sadly. "It's worse than failure, it's betrayal," said Butler. "I know as much as most men of the processes of corruption in the national life. I know we all know that the unscrupulous rich buy the railroads, buy the Senate, buy the law. But I confess to a sickening sense of horror at the knowledge I now have that they bought the church. And they have done it with a diabolical adroitness. You won't find a single man in Jordan's church who will say a word against Stonecroft. One year he gives the church a new organ, another he subscribes $10,000 towards a new parish house. Does Jordan need a holiday? Stonecroft, in the kindest and most delicate manner, gives him a check and sends him off to Europe. Is someone overtaken with misfortune? Stonecroft comes down with an ample donation. Does a young man need a situation? Stonecroft procures one for him. Everyone is soon under obligation to him, and pray who is going to inquire into the sources of his wealth when he uses it so generously? Why, I wouldn't trust myself to be honest in such an atmosphere. I believe that I should be corrupted with the rest. It would soon seem as if mere gratitude made criticism impossible." Butler continued walking up and down with angry strides. Presently he resumed. "But let that pass. Here's the case as I see it. Things have gone so far that it is useless to expect ministers to recognize the situation. I can't blame them. They've grown up in the environment and are mastered by it. Whenever a minister does recognize the situation and speaks out, he has to go. I know a great western city where half a dozen ministers have been driven from their pastorates in the last half dozen years, for no other reason than that they, for righteousness' sake, put themselves into opposition against the rich men of their churches. No, the individual minister is not strong enough to fight this battle alone. Therefore we must help him. I propose to re-establish the Inquisition." Gaunt and Palmer both laughed at this climax, and even Butler's lips relaxed in a grim smile. "Oh, the Inquisition was an excellent thing, if it had only been properly conducted," said Butler. "My Inquisition will be conducted on a strictly modern principle. I can get on quite well without tortures and burnings. Publicity will serve my purpose. I shall begin my operations with Stonecroft. And if I don't mistake, that is his hand upon the doorbell. I have summoned him to be present here at 9 o'clock. The words were scarcely spoken before William Stonecroft entered the room. He was a tall, elderly man, fresh-complexioned, inclined to stoutness, immaculately dressed in light summer costume. His manner was genteel, kindly, almost fatherly. He might have stood for the portrait of a model philanthropist. "Good morning, gentlemen," he said, and his voice radiated goodwill and sincerity. "Ah, Mr. Gaunt, I am pleased to know you, sir. I have followed your work with great interest. It's a wonderful work. I would have been glad to subscribe to it, but I understand from Mr. Butler that it is one of your principles not to receive large donations. A mistaken principle, I think, for why should the rich be debarred from helping in such good work, eh?" "If you will sit down, Mr. Stonecroft, I will try to answer your question," said Butler quietly. "It was because I wanted to discuss the whole matter with you that I ventured to ask you to meet with us here this morning." "I shall be extremely pleased to know your views," said Stonecroft. "I have about an hour to spare, not more, for I live very little in New York now. I prefer the country." "Perhaps it is because you live so little in New York now that you are not quite aware of certain things which are done by your authority," said Butler. "If you will allow me to speak for just 10 minutes without interruption, I think I can make clear to you what I mean." A shadow of apprehension passed over Stonecroft's face, but his manner still remained genteel. "Certainly," he said. "I shall always value the opportunity of hearing a person of Mr. Butler's eminence speak on any subject in which he is interested." Butler took from his portfolio a bundle of papers, and having carefully arranged them for easy reference, at once began to speak. He gave full details of the condition and uses of the house property which Stonecroft owned. Some of it was almost ruinous, without decent conveniences, crowded by the poor, who nevertheless paid exorbitant rentals. Some of it was rented for immoral purposes, at yet higher rates. He gave chapter and verse, the names of tenants, the amounts of rent paid in each instance. He then passed on to the management of Stonecroft's huge store. He gave the story of the girl and her interview with the manager, as he had already given it to Gaunt and Palmer. He supplemented it with similar facts. He closed his arraignment with one brief sentence. "What do you mean to do about it? Here is vice in the process of manufacture," he said. "It may be that personally you know little of what is going on under your name, but you are the richer by what is done. You are responsible. While we try to remedy wrong, you produce it. If there were no other reason for refusing your donation, this is enough. And so again, Mr. Stonecroft, I ask you, what do you mean to do about it?" As he spoke, the color left Stonecroft's face. He looked 10 years older. The moment Butler finished, he sprang to his feet. "By what right," he cried, "do you interfere in my private affairs?" "By the right of Christian justice, and because no affairs are private which involve the lives of other people." "I deny the right, all the same," he retorted. "Oh, let the question of right go, if you like. My only urgent question is what you intend to do about it." "What do you?" said Stonecroft. "I want to give you the opportunity of putting things right. I want you to look to the condition of your house property. I want you to pay the girls in your employ wages sufficient to maintain them in self-respect. You are rich enough to do these things. You believe yourself a Christian man, and therefore you ought to do them." "But, man, you don't know what you ask. I can't pay more than the current rate of wages. No wealth can stand the strain of such reforms as you ask. And if I sold my houses, who would be better? They would be bought by someone else who would prove a harsher landlord than I." "Surely that has nothing to do with it. It is your duty we are discussing, not the duty of other people." "Then I say flatly I can't do it. You are asking the impossible." "Right is never impossible. It may be difficult, but it is not impossible, Mr. Stonecroft. Do you realize that every dollar bill you have in your pocket is stained with the blood of innocence? That your yacht is paid for by the price of shame? That your country house is built over a pit of hell? Would it not be better to be poor and just than rich and what you are, a manufacturer of vice?" "I tell you I can't do it," replied Stonecroft. "Then I reply, you must." "And who will make me?" "I will. I propose to give you 1 month in which to consider the whole question. I believe that you have enough natural kindness of heart, enough natural sense of justice, if you will but consider the matter thoroughly, to come to my point of view. If unfortunately you come to an opposite decision, I shall publish in the Daily Light all the details about your position which I have discussed this morning." Stonecroft rose without a word. He was too stunned for further speech. When he left the room, Butler said grimly, "I think the Inquisition will prove a success. I rather think it has made its first convert." And that's the end of Chapter 19, Part B. Next week we'll continue with Chapter 20, Part A, The Pool and the River. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.